Brilliant. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Shift Book Club Live for November. I'm Sam Baker, and I'm delighted to be here, as I've just been saying, overly delighted to be here with internationally best-selling writer and podcaster, Katherine May. Katherine has written several memoirs, which we will talk about in a minute, but it's her third memoir, Wintering, The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times, that turned everybody into lunatics around her, ricocheted her into the bestseller charts in the States, in Germany, here in the UK. It's had rave reviews from icons of the hybrid memoir genre. Sorry, Katherine, you look so uncomfortable. I'll make it quick, I promise.
This is just such an un-British moment for me right now.
I know, I'm sorry, I've got to do it. On the podcast, I record it afterwards, so nobody actually has to listen to it. But you have had rave reviews from Elizabeth Gilbert, Cheryl, lovely Raynor, Winn, and it was described as a reading cure by The Guardian. And I have to say, when I read it, and it was after my worst wintering time, and I wished it had been published a couple of years earlier when I was really wintering, it really was a cure. I think cure is the perfect word for it. And like I was saying to you just now, I've posted about loads of books on social media, but whenever I post about wintering, it has a crazy reaction. People love it. It's like they need it in their lives. They push it on their friends. And I know I've bought, I don't know, 5, 6 copies. And I'm sure that they're not all lined up in the bathroom like a sad family. And I'm sure I'll be buying more. And so I'm really thrilled that you're able to be here, and I hope at the end you'll give us a tiny little sneak peek of Enchantment as well.
Of course, yeah.
I don't know whether everybody who managed to get a copy will be able to come tonight, but I've never had to disappoint so many people as I had to with Enchantment, and I actually begged your publisher for more copies, and they were like, "No, Sam. No,
because you know what? They haven't given me any to hand out to my Patreon. So
I managed to beg 10, and they said that when they get the finished copies in, they'll do some more. So if you're here and you didn't manage to get one, do keep an eye out, because there will be more copies when the book comes out. So let's talk about let's start by talking about the crazy reaction to wintering. Why do you think it? What is it? Do you think that resonated?
I have actually got a theory. I think it's because I left it deliberately quite open-ended as to the conclusions you draw or what actions you take from it. So it's a book that's kind of supportive, but it doesn't ever do the work for you. And it seems to me that everybody who reads it thinks it's a different book, and that's because they bring so much of themselves into it. So, you know, people will say to me, "Oh, you wrote a book about grief," and I'll be like, "Well, there's a chapter that's about grief, you know, but that's not what the book's about." And of course, loads of people think it's a book about the pandemic, and it was written before the pandemic. Particularly Americans,
no, that's
because it
weird.
Came out, because it came out during the pandemic. A lot of people just assumed that it was written in response to that situation, and of course it absolutely wasn't. And they're surprised when you say there's absolutely no mention of the pandemic anywhere in the book, and it takes them aback. And I think that level of kind of agency that people have got within it, I think, means that it becomes really personal, which is just lovely, because it's not my work, it's the readers.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because I'm immediately thinking that's what I did. I took what I wanted to take from it and saw what I wanted to see in it. But I hope that what I saw was there, rather than going, it's a book about the pandemic, because it clearly isn't. So tell us, even though you're obviously keeping it really open-ended, tell us about the concept of wintering.
So wintering it kind of does two things at once, I suppose. It talks about the times in our life when we are frozen, when we're kind of cut off from the rest of the world because we're going through a big life event, or an illness or mental illness, a divorce, or just like a big change. Like, I think a change can throw us into that space where we feel like we've dropped out of the main world and we're in a kind of underworld for a while, looking at everybody else getting on with it, and to us they're all fine except for us, and we're the only one that's in this space. But it's also a book about my love of winter, the season, and how I see it as a really nourishing kind of regenerative time rather than a deathly time. And so it's a synthesis of two ideas, and I suppose at its root it's a book about change and how we endure change, and what change does for us ultimately.
The book you ended up writing isn't the book you started out writing, is
it? Yes and no. So I pitched Wintering as I said I wanted to write a self-help book that was beautiful and that went on a journey, that walked alongside the reader. And I had this big plan for it that was all about me looking back on times I'd wintered in the past and being really wise about them, and like passing on this kind of hard-earned knowledge. And then just so many things happened that derailed me. So first of all, my husband got very sick, and then I got sick. And then my son had to be pulled out of school because he was struggling. And all of these things, it just kept stopping me from writing the book. And every time I sat down to write, I would think, oh, all of this other stuff's coming out and I can't write that because I've got to say something wise and wonderful about this wintering period. And it took me the longest time for it to click that this was the story, and that I had to, I just had to wade into what I was going through and share all the dirty parts of it and not try and sanitize it. And then, that made it a much more personal book. I hadn't wanted to write a personal book. Because Electricity of Every Living Thing had been so personal. And I just thought, I can't go through that again, like putting that really fragile part of myself out there and then having people discuss it with me as if I'm, a fictional character, and sometimes disagree with it, with me.
Right.
I thought, I was trying to avoid that, but I walked right into it all over again.
I mean, you've written 4 memoirs now, including Enchantment. Why do you think you keep going back to that form? Given how exposing it is,
Yeah, I think I love it as a reader. I guess for me, I relish going through that pain barrier and trying to reach some kind of truth telling about real life, like as in an emotional sense, and peeling away the layers of gloss that we all put on our lives, including me, that you irresistibly sugarcoat everything. And it's kind of an archaeology for me. I go down through these layers until I hit this place that feels kind of sharp and clean, and you get kind of addicted to that. It's terrifying, but it's also very, very real, and it does give you this chance to engage analytically with your life and your experiences in a way that I don't think you even get the opportunity to do in therapy, really. So and I don't know, I just respect it as a as a form, which I don't, it's quite a maligned genre, isn't it? Memoir, I think it can be quite patronized. It's like sharing your misery.
Maybe less so now. It feels like in the last few years it's become quite a big thing, but definitely that whole misery memoir thing, maybe a decade ago.
I mean, that was all the kind of like I was an abused child thing got very kind of identikit, didn't it? But very recently I've heard publishing people again saying, oh, memoir doesn't really sell, so they're drawing back on memoir now. So
you know what publishers are like, though.
I know. I know. It's like, well, do you think you could maybe talk about it in a different way? Because readers love memoir. They love that
Yeah,
sense of contact. But yeah, there we go.
yeah, I think so. But wintering almost started out as potentially nature writing, didn't it? A kind of a memoir nature writing. I mean, I know it's still got
Yeah,
that element, but
yeah.
much more heavily swayed towards nature writing and case studies.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't really ever see myself as a nature writer. Because I always think that nature writers are kind of expert in their field somehow. They're sort of native to the landscape in a way that I feel like I've come to it very late in life. So I guess I wouldn't have seen it that way. But I mean, a lot of people do read it as nature writing as well. And that's what's become quite interesting about nature writing, isn't it? It seems to have become a sort of vehicle through which we talk about tricky points in life. So yeah, it definitely kind of goes into there a little bit as well. But yeah, whenever I meet other nature writers, they always seem like much more elemental beings than me. They seem like they'd cope with camping, which is just something that I absolutely can't do.
Oh God, no. Well, that's you don't want to spend too much time with Raynor Winn.
I know, she's so
She's like
hardy.
hardy as they come, isn't she?
I know, she's amazing. But yeah, I mean, her latest book made me just chuckle. Like, is there any distance that Raynor will not walk?
Absolutely crazy.
It just keeps going.
Anyway, to go back to your personal wintering, which is that forms really the crux of the start of the book. You had you had already decided to write the book about wintering before
Anything
I wouldn't go
started,
so far as
yeah.
to say your life collapsed, but it was
It did a little bit, yes, yeah.
yeah, it was like disaster on top of disaster on top of disaster. And you had already resigned from your job at that point.
Mm, mm. Yes, that's right. So I guess I was already teetering on the edge. You know, it was a very difficult decision to resign from my job, and I was incredibly stressed and exhausted, but maybe in denial about it as well, and thinking I was coping with it better than I actually was. And I thought I was making this very positive decision to quit before it all got to me, but in fact it had already got to me. And I mean, like a couple of days after I handed in my notice, I started getting ill. I had this incredibly intense pain in my abdomen when I was at work one day. It had been grumbling away, but suddenly one day while I was at work, it was just this searing pain, and I was kind of doubled over my desk. And I rang my doctor from work and said, "Tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. Do I get an ambulance?" And he was like, "Well, it's the wrong side for an appendicitis, so I'd just go home." So I was like, I kind of got myself home, and this diagnostic process began. But in the meantime, he said to me, like, I think you should be ready for a cancer diagnosis. It's got all the signals of bowel cancer.
So
And
did
so
you say that, or did you raise bowel cancer, or did he?
no, he did. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And it turned out not to be, but actually, I had a lot of growths, a lot of polyps grown in my bowel. So I was told that I had to be careful for the rest of my life. And I still sort of suffer from it a lot. And you can never make a direct connection with stress, but I couldn't help but think that the life I'd been living and the level of stress I'd been putting up with had at least accelerated this, if not caused it. And that gave me real pause for thought, really.
I mean, stress, it's a really weird thing, isn't it? I mean, when I was reading
Oh, I mean,
Wintering,
you've written
that was,
beautifully about this, haven't you?
oh, thank you. But one of the things that really resonated for me when you in Wintering is when you're talking about the way that being ill makes you feel. And, you know, and it all is tied in very much, isn't it? It's the way that we lionize busy, busy, busy. And I think you said, I'm trying to find the notes I made. Oh, people admired you for how much you got done and how hard you worked. And I think I definitely felt like that too. And that's one of the reasons I think when I was reading Wintering, I was thinking, yes, this is speaking to me. And I think to so many women, because it's all doing more and more and more. And that's
so much.
Whether or not it's true, we feel like we're winning at life if we're working hard and people think we're doing good. By which I mean doing well, not like doing good for society. And it's that kind of obsession that I think makes it so hard in the first instance to accept winter, to accept that you are wintering, and to see that as okay. I mean, I think that's the really big leap for most people, is to accept that wintering is an okay thing, because it's, I don't know, it feels to me like it's frowned on by society, but maybe that's a generational thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly is by some parts of society still. And there's that thing in your head that when you're working, you are something. And if you're not busy, what are you? And what does that mean? And not just do you matter, but are you good enough? Like, I think we're, you know, the number of times that you walk into someone and they say, oh, hi, how are you? And you say, oh, busy, you know?
Yeah.
And a couple of years ago, I started almost as a practice to stop saying busy when people asked, you know, and to say, actually, I've not got much on at the moment, and to sort of try out that status as someone who was not fully occupied all the time and still completely okay. And yeah, there's just all these matters of self-esteem that arise when we are not 100% occupied and able to demonstrate that we're needed by the outside world. And I think that is quite recent historically. I think this obsession with being busy all the time and having to be contactable all the time because the world's going to stop without your input, and yeah, stretching the boundaries of the working day endlessly. It's quite new, really. And most of us could step down significantly from that sense of urgency. I will say very gently. And you know, I'm the same. I mean, actually, even so, I have a lovely community like your community, and we've been working on what you do if you don't want to do a digital detox, but if you want to kind of reframe your relationship with your phone. And as part of that, last week, I deleted the email app from my phone, which just
honestly, I felt a bit sick when you said that.
Yeah, it felt like walking a tightrope over a ravine or something. But do you know what? It's just fine. Like, if anyone really needs me, the people who matter have got my phone number and they can call me. The rest of it is just, you know, checking your emails when you're standing in line in the post office. And that's a terrible time to check your emails because you can't do anything. And that increases your stress. And so, yeah, I'm still working on not being the fifth emergency service. Actually, that's going to be a lifetime practice for me.
So one of the things that really resonated, I mean, again, it spoke to me, but also when I was researching the shift, a thing that really came through with the women that I was speaking to. So I had a kind of a focus group of about 50 women who I would email questions to, and they generously gave me their time and their experiences. But I remember emailing them about this kind of subject, about being ill and about the guilt of being ill and feeling like a slacker because you're taking time off. And it really struck me that you, and in fact I, on a previous occasion, both sought sick notes from doctors. And it was
Yeah.
like, for me, and I think it's fair to say for you, it's like you needed permission, and
Yeah.
you couldn't give it to yourself. You
Yeah.
couldn't say, I need a week out, I need to take it. And the number of women who emailed me and said, I long to be sick. I'm not
Yeah.
like making, I'm not making light of cancer or something serious, but I long
Yeah.
to be properly ill. So I'm in hospital and nobody can
Yeah.
call on me. I can't feel that I should be doing things. I long to be in a position where I can't feel bad about what I'm not doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. To have that.
Kind of terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's like that, to have a proper thing, because we don't think that stress is a proper illness, even though it's clearly making so many of us sick, you know. And yeah, you want a diagnosed condition. And there's that paranoia that you get into when you're in that space too, when you're sick. And I found that every time I left the house, I felt absolutely grindingly terrible about it. And I was literally looking over my shoulder to see if anyone would spot me, in case they rang up my work colleagues and said, well, she's able to walk very slowly down the street. You know,
Yeah.
it really was like that. There's something going very badly wrong, isn't there, when we are in this mindset that we can't ever be sick, and that if we are going to be sick, it has to be life-threatening, because that's the only way we'll accept our need to just rest, to just basically rest and take it easy. It's kind of devastating, I think.
So you've wintered a few times in your lives, and at one point you make the point that you feel you had experience of wintering because you were undiagnosed, one of
Yeah.
many girls who are undiagnosed autistic.
Mm.
Um, how did that impact, do you think?
What, over the course of my life?
Well,
Or
on
just when I
your
learned?
kind of experience of what did you learn, I
Mm.
suppose, from that it kind of gave you a
Yeah.
resource that other people maybe don't have?
Yeah, well, I think what it means is that wintering is really quite normal for me, and the cycles have been very frequent and quite short cycles between the last dropping out of the world. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that autistic people experience is complete burnout really regularly, because you're spending a lot of time fitting in with a world that doesn't really quite accommodate you, and that you're not really comfortable in. And particularly before you know you're autistic, you can't even make adaptations. You've got no kind of analytical understanding of it to make the changes you need to make. So I'd had, even during my school years, I had a year out when I was 15 with what was diagnosed as ME at the time, but you know, it was really one of those reaching out and giving it a label. Then a couple of years later, I had half a year out with severe depression. And then a couple of years after that, in the workplace, I had to I got sick again with a kind of ME-like illness. And a couple of years after that, I got severe anxiety, you know. So that pattern is actually really, really common for particularly undiagnosed autistic people. And what it meant was that I began to get a sense for the shape of these periods of time, I think, and almost to trust them, to kind of trust that they did end, and that normally they brought with them a change that might have been unwanted, but that was necessary. And that they opened up a space where you began to imagine the next life and began to feel desire again towards the whatever it was that came next. Because I think one of the things that happens first before we really succumb to wintering is we lose our sparkle. We feel very flat. And so when other people would go through these periods, I'd find myself kind of saying to them, actually, this isn't as bad as you think it is. You're in a process that's really recognizable to me, and that actually one day you'll come to be grateful for. It's a correction, it's a readjustment. And that eventually, led to me thinking, I feel like I need to explain this in a book. I feel like I need to like really put this idea down, because it had helped me so much. And I literally just wanted to share the concept, I think.
So now, once you realized that you were able to see winter coming and you understood the shapes of that, how did it affect the way you approached it?
I think, first of all, I'd say that I've learned that it can't be rushed. And so, whereas I used to try and, I don't know, put myself on some kind of a regime where I'd be like, right, this is the plan. And I'm gonna like get up really early and I'm gonna work out, and then I'm gonna do some yoga, and then I'm gonna like, here's the list of work on, so I'd often approach it by trying to work even harder, and then I'd fail, and then I'd feel even worse, and it would, make the cycle even deeper. So I think the first thing I'd say is that I have come to realize that there's no rushing it, and that actually, to some extent, you need to surrender to it. And also that it's an invitation to treat yourself really well and really kindly, rather than to punish yourself, and to increase to make your home as comfortable as you can, and to use that time out of life to do gorgeous, restful things like, reading a book in a day, or taking really long baths that you just top up for hours. Or, for me, when I'm sick, I always bake if I'm not too sick. And that's a really restful space for me to kind of meander around the kitchen, just doing things with my hands. And so, I learned to see it as an invitation, but also like a very serious signal that deserved to be taken as seriously as I possibly could, and not something that was trivial, and not something that was lazy, or that was, skiving. And to kind of bury into it. And I think the last thing I'd say is that I expect it now to actually be quite beautiful, to find austere beauty in that place, and maybe to come into contact with I don't know, perhaps the natural world or the seasonal world. Oh, my light's gone off. I'm really sorry. I'm going to look really grainy now.
You have suddenly gone a different color.
Yes, I know. Well, that's no, I'm not going to sit and mend it for you. I have to have me looking
Don't
a little
worry,
bit shrouded.
no, it's fine.
But yeah, I know that I will have, despite feeling sad and anxious and all the really negative emotions, that there will be these moments of really intense, almost euphoria within that space. And it can be a very ecstatic place if you let it be, and if you trust it, and if you've got faith that it's not, the end of the world.
I think Shelley has just commented that it reminds her of, I don't know whether you've read this, the book Recovery, The Lost Art of Convalescence by Gavin Francis.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm really hoping to get him on my podcast if I can. I think it's such a, it's a very practical guide actually, but haven't we lost that concept of recovering from illness? We've now got this
that
binary that you're either sick
thing.
or well.
Yeah.
And it, generationally, we'd have given ourselves some time to feel better again, and that would have been utterly legitimate, and that's just gone.
Yeah, that kind of 6 months in a bath chair in Eastbourne is gone.
Oh,
we don't
dream
do that
of that. The Germans have it though, don't they? They have these kind of wonderful spas that you go to recover your zest for life.
Oh, you sit outside in the freezing cold. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you didn't do as much traveling and kind of on the ground research as you expected to for this book, but you did spend a fair amount of time, didn't you, talking to, well, what I've written down is talking to people from dark countries. But I think we all know what I mean by that. We mean Scotland upwards, you know.
The dark hordes. I think I always say people who are intimate with the cold.
Yes, yeah. What do you, can you, I mean, this is one of those questions that you could probably take an hour to answer, but you can't because we haven't got that long. What are there any kind of like key lessons you learned from those conversations? Like, for instance, I absolutely love the idea of being in sauna as
Yes,
opposed
the
to being in a
sauna.
sauna.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
in
right.
sauna. That's
In
even better.
sauna is a state of mind. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the main things is that they totally accept that winter's coming in a way that maybe we can get away with not doing in these kind of more southern countries. So they plan and they start planning for winter in July and August when the weather's good, and they make sure their home is, secure against the snowfall, and they make sure they've got enough food in the freezer if they get snowed in for a few weeks. And there's something there about acceptance of the inevitability of winter that I think we can really lack. And yeah, they seek out ways to make life kind of magical and special, even when it's grim and they're kind of stuck. And so the sauna is a really good example. That, and I'm saying sauna because that's how they say it. I say sauna in everyday life, but it seems to me that like the Scandinavian sauna is different to our sauna. Like a sauna for us is this thing that you go to occasionally at a leisure centre, and it's like extra to life. You've treated yourself. Whereas, for the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Finns, having a sauna is seen as essential in the same way that having a bathroom is. And Hannah, who I interviewed, talked about how the sauna was this place where life and death happened, where women used to give birth in the sauna a couple of generations back, and it's where you'd take your dead to clean the body before you buried them. And so it was this really like almost ritual space. And she associated it with a very particular state of mind that was calm and peaceful and kind of philosophical. And yeah, that, I suppose what that says to me is that when winters are truly hard and you can't avoid the hardship, you're forced to find whatever comfort and relief that you can. And that made me think about the way that we almost indulge ourselves by refusing comfort and by not allowing ourselves to be looked after even when we're suffering, because we always don't feel like we're suffering enough, and so we have to make it hard, and we don't want to be indulgent, and therefore we don't heal. We don't make that space in which we can recuperate, to go back to that word, or convalesce. And yeah, we could really work on that. I see it all the time. I don't know about you on social media, where people are like, well, we shouldn't we shouldn't be too happy this week because this is happening in the world. And it's like, we should make hay while the sun shines, because it's not, it will come, and there will be times when we can't make ourselves comfortable and we can't have a good time. And it's our responsibility to make ourselves well enough to support the people who are suffering and struggling at this point, and to be strong enough to endure whatever we have to endure next. And so we should always find comfort and happiness where we can. I think that's definitely what I got from the Scandies.
One of the things that really resonated with me, well, I just thought, in fact, was really fascinating, was the ant and the grasshopper.
Yes.
I mean, I love a fable anyway, but
do you remember that one from childhood?
Yes.
Yeah. The ant and the grasshopper, and the ants are, yeah, I don't like the ants. The grasshopper he lazes all summer long and he plays tunes, and the ants keep warning him and saying, when the winter comes, you'll struggle. And it comes true, and so they let him die. And I just like, what moral lesson is that really?
There's so much you could say about that, isn't there? It's like
Fascist little ants,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah, exactly. Hostile environment to the nth
Yes.
degree.
It seems to me that the ants are hugely missing out, because here is someone who they could invite into their community, who could bring music and solace and beauty for a little while in exchange for a little food. And they'd rather that died altogether than acknowledge that there is difference in their world, or that sometimes you have to be compassionate. And I think that thinking really dominates our politics quite often, actually,
I was going to say
unfortunately.
those ants have spent too much time on Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah, the ants are very self-righteous. And the truth, yeah, and I say in wintering, the truth is we all have ant years and grasshopper years. It's rarely that straightforward, but we can at least be kind to the people who are having grasshopper years, in the acknowledgement that that will be us at some point too, and that there will be times when we need to lean on other people. And part of the damagingness of that philosophy is that it stops us from reaching out for help when we need it, because we feel like we've got to conceal our ant years, our grasshopper years, sorry,
Yeah.
and pretend we're always ants. And ants are a nuisance, so yeah.
Yeah.
I feel less bad
Ants
about
get
pouring
kettles of hot
boiling
water
water
for
on them
them.
now.
Yes, yes.
That's it.
Before we talk about enchantment, I just want to ask you about the importance of rituals,
Mm,
because there's
mm,
a really interesting section on that. And I just thought it was so interesting the way that ritual makes those periods of those winter periods in nature
yeah.
so much more tolerable. And you kind of met this an aside about rituals being a bit cringeworthy, but then you kind of go, look, we're so obsessed with Christmas. We've got to the point where Christmas is now like practically 6 weeks long. It's like, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I grew up without ritual at all. And I never realized I needed it until later in life, really. And that there was this creeping realization of not being able to really mark the key moments in my life, like not having a way to really, I don't know, recognize the significance that I was feeling. And I think what really changed me was talking to Philip Cargom, who was at the time the chief druid. Actually, there were two people claiming to be the chief druid. That was the funny thing. And I spent some time circling the wrong one, who claimed to be the incarnation of Arthur Pendragon, and spent a lot of his time having fights with people on Facebook. And I thought maybe the druids were lost to me, but then I came across Philip, who's amazing and who's like a very thoughtful, gentle, wise soul. And he said, okay, some ritual is a bit cringy and a bit weird, and I know that being a druid is a little bit weird, but lots of things are a bit weird. And here's the thing, being a druid means that I'm marking 8 points in the calendar year, and that means I've got 6 weeks between each one. And if I'm going through a hard time, then those 6 weeks are a process of waiting for the next time I can join and gather with other like-minded people and perform a ritual that will let me think about where I am now and let me see how far I've come. And it's that rhythm to the year that can get you through the darkest days. It's a different way of marking time, and it's fundamentally emotional. It fundamentally invites your meaning making, and your feeling. And I put that way, it's so simple. It's such a simple thing, and it doesn't have to be elaborate. And I think what I really have realized since I wrote Wintering It's like a lot of people have asked me about ritual, and first of all, I didn't really know what to say, and I've thought about it a lot, and I think what good ritual does is it lets you come as you are. It gives you things to do without necessarily telling you what to feel or think about it, and you pour your feelings in that moment into it. You bring whatever significance it is to you at that point in time, and if it's open enough, it just lets you think about it, lets you reflect about it. And I try and find more and more ways to just mark time in a different way that isn't the clock or the calendar. And it helps. It's soothing.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about enchantment. So if anybody's got questions for Katherine, do post them in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking, and we've got loads to talk about, so it's fine. So tell us a bit about enchantment. Where should we start? Where did you start?
I started in the middle and worked my way outwards. I didn't know where to start, actually. One of the things about writing a book like Wintering that's obviously meant a lot to a lot of people is that it's incredibly intimidating to write the next book. And I was also obviously, affected by the pandemic as we all were, and I felt full of brain fog. And I didn't know what to say for the longest time. But I had this central image in my mind, which was about a meteor storm that happened in 1833. And this meteor storm was so enormous that the people who witnessed it was only the East Coast of America that saw it. And it happened in the middle of the night. So only a few people saw it. But the people who saw it felt as if it revealed to them that they were on a planet in space. The sky was absolutely full of points of light all of a sudden, and they could see the arc of the sky. And there were all these different responses to it. People thought it was the end of days. People, thought that it meant something, that it was a sign. But a lot of other people didn't, and it really was the origin of meteor science. Now, we didn't really know what meteors were until that point when people began to study them. And I knew I wanted to write about that, but I couldn't truly understand why. And it took me a long time writing around it to really unpick it. And eventually I realized that what I was thinking about is how we can perceive the magic in the world again and let it feel grand and magical and fascinating, and use that to get us through these very, very dark times, and to ground ourselves again, and to allow ourselves to create a meaningful relationship with this world around us, even when it seems so utterly hostile. And what I loved about the meteor storm, I think, was that the wonder of it didn't diminish when we understood it. And I think a lot of the time when we talk about, a grand experience, these kind of awe-inspiring moments, we think that the magic will drain out of the world if we know it, but actually knowing it can enrich that. And I wanted to play in that space in my book. So it's really about finding that sense of enchantment again that we all probably had when we were children, that we've very willfully left behind.
Do you feel like you could do a little reading?
Yes, let me grab my book. I have not had much chance to do this, so it's quite exciting.
I mean, use us to practice on.
Yeah, well, that sounds really good. It's funny because, of course, Wintering, I've got loads of, places that I'd turn to read. But should I read you the bit about the night the stars fell?
Yeah, whichever bit you like.
Well, I found that page, so let's do that. In the early hours of the 13th of November, 1833, those who were awake shared an extraordinary sight. According to the New York Evening Post, it seemed that the Cape of Heaven was raining down a shower of fire over the eastern states of America. Shooting stars came in such density that the whole firmament appeared to be in motion with them, as if the planets and constellations were falling from their places. In the time before electric light, night wakers were well used to seeing meteors scuttling across the heavens, but this was different. The black bowl of the sky was suddenly full of sparks, 1,000 at a time, all drawing silvery lines like the ribs of a celestial umbrella. Never before had anyone seen the sky's arc so clearly described. It was as though a curtain had been drawn back to reveal the truth, known but never really understood, that the earth is a ball floating through the vastness of space, and that we, its motion-sick citizens, are only ever spectators of this grand planetary drama.
Oh,
I love that bit.
When is it? It's out not out till March, is it?
Yeah, first week of March. I can't remember exactly what date. It might say it on here actually. Nope. Yeah, first week of March. I think maybe the 3rd, I'm going to say. So yeah, it's got a couple of months left.
Katherine will be on the podcast talking about enchantment around about that
I
time,
can't wait.
which is really exciting. Really exciting. And it's just made me think, in Wintering, you talk, I mean, and this really resonated with me because I was in Iceland last week, but you talk about when you went to see the Aurora Borealis.
Yeah.
And how you're expecting literally a light show. and what you get, and I had this exact experience last week.
Yeah.
What you actually get is like a little green
bit of smoke
tinge, like a little bit of smoke. It's still amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not like the pictures you see on social media.
Oh, it's nothing like those pictures. They are all sped up and they are all color enhanced and taken with a long shutter opening. There's a lot in enchantment that's developing that theme, really, that's about how the beauty of these things isn't that display, like that kind of electric neon light floating across the sky. It's actually the fact that you have to get your eye in, and that to see the northern lights, you have to become an expert in them, and you have to slow down and look for them. They're not going to just pop up in front of you and look like Disney lights. It's a much more personal experience that you're invited to have with them, and it's a relationship that you have to form. And for me, that's much more exciting than stepping out and seeing bright green streaked across the heavens. And yeah, there's a few moments in the book I write about exactly that. I go hunting for my Brocken spectre, which is a long-standing obsession of mine. The Brocken spectres it's like a kind of phenomenon that happens in the mountains where you are, now let's get this right, you're standing above cloud cover with the sun at your back low, so it's normally early morning, and that projects your shadow across the clouds. But for reasons that I don't think I'm capable of explaining right now, you see your shadow with a halo around its head, like a rainbow, because of the diffraction of light on the clouds. And they are very, very rare. And if you see one, you've happened upon it, but of course a lot of significance has been placed in them over time, because it is man seeing himself as a giant, essentially. And so I went off to go and look for one, and I didn't find it, and I don't think that's even a spoiler. And I talk about why the hunt is kind of in a lot of ways more special than the actual finding of the thing, although I'd still love to see one. Amy Liptrot read the book last week, and she wrote to me to say she loved it, which was kind of and said, but you're gonna hate me, but here's a photo my friend sent me last week, and her friend had seen her Brocken spectre, and I was like,
oh no.
Yeah,
She didn't.
So I'm going to be haunted by those. It was mean of her. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to be haunted by pictures of people's Brocken spectres, I think, when this book comes out.
Yeah, you'll be inundated with people sending you pictures of things they achieved that you didn't.
Yeah.
Great. Fleur is asking, because you don't read the audiobook of Wintering, do you? Fleur is asking if you're planning to read the
No.
audiobook of Enchantment. No, not going to.
I am. No, I am. Yeah, I am.
Oh, good.
And in fact, I wanted to read the Wintering one, but nobody ever asked me. And by the time I got round to asking them if I could, they'd already recorded it. So I really hope one day I'll get to re-record it, actually. I did just re-record the audiobook of Electricity of Every Living Thing because it had been...
Wow.
Yeah, I thought about that a lot because it had been voiced by an actor who wasn't autistic, and I really felt that it needed to be, if not me, someone else who understood the experience, because we've been represented by neurotypical people so often, and therefore often dramatized in a way that isn't true, actually. So I went back and read that. So maybe one day I'll get to record the Wintering one, but I'm booked to do the Enchantment one, so that is definitely coming.
Oh, that's really good, because it was a really lovely kind of spine-tingling reading. So
Yeah,
I think the publishers have got better at trusting non-fiction authors in particular to read their work, which is good.
and it's not easy, is it? And I think actually the pandemic has helped because a lot of us have got the recording equipment at home and things, and it can get more convenient. It can be really tricky to record a whole book for a week.
Right, I have got a couple of questions that popped up while we were talking about Enchantment. Pip is asking, I'll kind of ask you as I read, if you know what I mean. She says she's curious whether being known as an expert in wintering, since the book's success, has brought pressure on you to have your wintering totally sussed. And then follows that question up with a question that asks you to have it totally sussed by you've learned more since you wrote the book, and if you could share your latest wintering learning.
Oh, that's interesting. I can answer both of those in one go, which is that I am very resistant to having it totally sussed. And I spent a lot of time being interviewed about wintering and really disappointing interviewers who've wanted me to say, okay, well, I've solved this now. You know, like, what are your 5 top tips for a good wintering or something?
Oh, God. So they can box them out for the people who can't be bothered to read the feature. Oh,
yeah,
God.
exactly. And so, no, I've resisted it really hard. And one of the reasons for that is that I think there's too much fake expertise in this world, and the publishing industry will definitely channel you towards that because people want answers. And I'm really comfortable to sit in the place that says, this is not about having answers. This is never going to be anything other than a process, and you're never going to shortcut it. And in service of that, I talk about my wintering moments all the time in my newsletter. Like, I'm constantly documenting and thinking a little further on what it really means. And I think a book like mine, for people that have actually read it rather than people that assume that they know what's in it, nobody wants me to have it sussed, and that's great because I haven't got it sussed. But I do dig ever deeper into the ritual aspect and into rest, and that's been the unexpected subject matter for me over the last few years, because I'm not the world's best rester. And in fact, the subtitle of Wintering, the power of rest and retreat in difficult times, isn't one that I wrote myself. My subtitle was How to Survive When Life is Frozen. And so I felt very inexpert about talking about rest for a long time, and I've developed my thinking on it, but I have to live it. I'm very method, you know, and I've been practicing how to rest better and how to be in a kind of vulnerable way, like a model learner for rest. And so, yeah, I'm learning a lot about how to take things more slowly, how to lower my expectations, how to be realistic about what I can actually achieve, And yeah, that's what I often end up writing in my newsletter. It seems that seems to be my subject matter.
Yeah, but everybody, I mean, everybody who's here is obviously a member of the Shift, so you've probably seen me linking to Katherine's newsletter, Stray Attentions.
Stray Attention,
Stray
yeah.
Attentions. It's brilliant. Sign up for it, definitely. And are you still doing the Wintering Sessions podcast?
Yes, except it's about to have a new name. So
oh, that makes sense of something
yeah.
weird in the press release. That's fine. I understand that.
Yes, that would be right. Yeah. And in fact, it should have been launched by now, but my whole team had separate wintering moments of their own, so we're a little bit delayed.
Yeah.
So Wintering Sessions is about to become slightly different. I've just moved it on a little bit. I've moved on the scope so that we can talk to a different range of people, but it's still going to be really about digging into those tricky corners of life. But it's now coming out in January because everyone just had to surrender for a while. And I feel like as a leader of a group of people, I now have to model that process of saying, it's okay, we can put this back. Nothing is urgent here, you know. So that's been part of my learning, definitely. Making space for other people's disasters.
Yeah, you can't really be, oh, it's all too indispensable, we have to do it now.
You've just got to work harder.
Really in the spirit. Yeah.
Can you put on a weekend? No, exactly. Yes, so
exactly, you can't do that. Tanya has asked a few questions. I'm going to start with, where is your favourite place to retreat to?
Always South Devon, always has been. I've been going there on holiday since I got married. We eloped down there, actually. And whenever life gets really hard, I just need to get down there onto the beautiful stretch of the Southwest Coast Path between Salcombe and Start Point. And it's just so soothing. It's beautiful in every season, and the sea crashes in, and I love that sound. And it still feels mostly very rural and very cut off. And I love it down there.
And she's also asked, which writer has inspired you in 2022?
Oh, so many. Where do you begin? I have been obsessing about Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner this year, which is the perfect Shift book.
Yes, yes. So many people have. It's Tracy Thorn. Tracy Thorn came on the podcast, and she picked it as her book.
Oh, amazing!
It's so good. Everybody, you have to read Lolly. Is it Sylvia Townsend Warner?
Sylvia Townsend Warner, yeah. So it's had a huge impact on me this year. It was recommended to me a few years ago by a student, and I kind of, speed read it at the time to be polite, and didn't really have time for it, and it seemed very dense to me. But I came back to it this year, and just books talk to you at different times in your life, and I'd made more time to really listen to it. I just think it's extraordinary, and I think it's it's a route map for women in the second half of their life, and it's a very bolshy, resistant route map at that. And it's definitely had a big impact on my thinking this year, without a doubt. It's just an amazing book.
And Tanya's last question, which is, which book are you reading right now?
Oh, I mean, as ever, I'm reading about 900 books right now. I am.
Me too.
I'm reading a proof of Marina Benjamin's new book. So Marina Benjamin wrote
I want
The
to get
Middle
my mitts
Pools
on
and
that.
Insomnia. Yes, and it's called A Little Give, and it's about women's work and about housework and how it's intertwined with women's lives. And she's just such an astute observer, and she always takes you into such interesting directions. So I'm loving that. I have just also read Alice Vincent's new book, Why Women Grow.
Oh yeah,
which is really beautiful. I mean, in lots of ways, I think for slightly younger women than me, it's really about that point in your life when you're thinking about whether you should have a baby and everyone else is, and you're not sure. And I strongly related to it, but also felt deep relief that I'm no longer there.
Yeah.
But I tell you another really great book that I've nearly finished. It's called On Not Knowing. Can you see that, by Emily Ogden? Emily Ogden, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if
just
you can see
about.
that in the camera. It's lovely short essays about uncertainty. And they're all kind of set in the natural world, but the writing is beautiful. And it's just one of those quiet little books that not many people have mentioned to me, but I picked it up in a bookshop because I like the cover, and it's just been incredible. So yeah, there's more good books out there than I have time to read, unfortunately, to my eternal sadness.
I know, I've got my unread pile just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
It's menacing. I also very recently discovered Miriam Towles, the novelist, who I'd not read before, and she's fantastic.
Oh, Miriam Taves, she says,
How do you say it? Taves, is it? Oh, okay.
And
Taves.
she was our first, the really swotty book club members will know this. She was our first ever Shift book club.
She's great. Which book?
Well, we did the Fight Night, which was new.
Okay.
Have you read Fight Night?
I haven't. I've got it sitting right in front of me ready.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's so funny.
What a writer,
so many of
honestly.
her books are amazing. Which one have you read?
I loved All My Puny Sorrows. I just thought that was just
brilliant.
Such a funny, sad, thought-provoking book. What an amazing thing.
I mean, all of her books fit that criteria. She wrote a book called Women Talking, which has just been made into a film by Sarah Polley. And it should be incredibly traumatic because it's about an abuse case in the Mennonite community. All of her books are set in the Mennonite community because that's where she grew up.
Yeah.
But it's actually, because all of her books are about how women engage with each other, you spend much more time laughing hysterically than you do crying, although you do spend a bit of time crying too. Oh, I think she's absolutely incredible.
Incredible, yeah. And I think what I love is the way that she makes dark things funny, because that's the truth. That's how we deal with life actually outside of novels. We laugh in the most desolate times, and I just think she's just captures something that feels very real.
Yeah, she's absolutely. I just have to say, you have to read Fight Night and then tell me what you think about Grandma Elvira. Right, last question, because we've totally run over, and I promised you we'd finish on time. But you talk quite a few times in Wintering, you talk about your tendency to read books that feed into that moment, whether. And I mean, I do that too. I have books that I like reading at Christmas, and then the books that I like reading around about autumn, around spooky time. What is if you had to pick one seasonal read, what would it be?
Oh, I was talking about this on Instagram this week. Like I have a whole set of books that I pick up at this time of year. And early on, it's Nigel Slater's Christmas Chronicles, which I just feel eases me into the season and makes me feel that kind of very gently festive feeling that feels really nice. And Dylan Thomas's A Child's Christmas in Wales I reach for this time of year. And as the season goes on, I love rereading The Dark is Rising. It's just such a great book. There are so many actually. And in fact, I'm just researching a project about the midwinter period at the moment, about the sort of period between the solstice and the new year. And so I'm just burying myself deep in this pile of books about that time, like histories well, actually a lot of history, in fact, but also looking at kind of medieval epic poems about midwinter and things. I'm just having the best time with it, and I love reading across a theme, like just chasing an idea through every book I can find. So I'm very joyfully doing that at the moment.
That sounds brilliant. Before we wrap up, just to let everybody know, there will be no book club in December. That's because I know that none of you would come. So what's the point?
You won't turn up.
I'm cutting myself some slack there. I'm whatever the right phrase is, I'm doing it. However, that just gives you an extra long time to get engrossed in January's book, which is Amazing Grace Adams by Fran Littlewood, in which our perimenopausal heroine fights back. Think Mrs. Dalloway, Lolly Willows, Where'd You Go, Bernadette? We'll be talking to Fran at the end of January. I think you'd love it. But keep an eye on your inbox in the next couple of weeks, because there will be 20 free copies coming from the publisher, and we will get those to you before Christmas, so you'll have loads of time to catch up. So that's all for tonight. Thank you, Katherine, for being so fascinating and brilliant. And thank you everyone for coming. It's brilliant to see you on the other side of Christmas.